Hi, my name is Carrie and I'm 32 years old. A couple of years ago, I went through a divorce. It was a tough experience, but now I feel like I'm in a place where I can talk about it, so here I am. I've always felt like I lived an average life. I wasn't particularly great at anything. I did okay in school, and I was decent at most things I tried, but I never excelled at any of them. You could say I was a jack of all trades, master of none. My looks were pretty average too. I wasn't unattractive, but I wasn't the type to turn heads when I walked into a room. Growing up, I was comfortable with how I looked. I wasn't self-conscious because I'd had a few really handsome boyfriends in high school and college, so my appearance never really bothered me. That all changed when I got into a toxic relationship during my last year of college. At first, my boyfriend seemed nice. I knew he wasn't the one, but I enjoyed his company, so I kept seeing him. As my feelings for him grew, I started ignoring his bad behavior. I was so blinded by love that I didn't realize how much he was hurting my self-esteem. By the time the relationship ended, my confidence was completely shattered. I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror without feeling ugly and breaking down in tears. It took me 5 years after college and leaving that boyfriend to start dating again. The person I began seeing was my now ex-husband, Nick. We met at a bar when I was out celebrating a friend's birthday. I wasn't drinking that night because I didn't like how overly confident I got when I was drunk, and I didn't want to embarrass myself. Nick was the one who approached me. "Hey, how's it going?" he asked. "Oh, hello, I'm good, thank you. How about you?" "I'm just enjoying the vibe here. Mind if I join you? Why are you sitting alone?" I needed a break from all the dancing. We're celebrating a friend's birthday. It looks like they're having a blast. They really are. They're all single, by the way, if you're interested. Why go to them when I'm already talking to the most beautiful girl in the world? You must need glasses if you're talking about me. My eyesight's fine. I could have talked to them, but I chose you. Oh. How about this? Give me your number, and tomorrow when we're sober, we'll grab coffee. I like that idea. We exchanged phone numbers and continued chatting until Nick had to leave for work the next day. I felt a warm rush of happiness. No one had ever approached me like that before. In all my past relationships, I was always the one who started the conversation. Nick slowly began to help me overcome my insecurities. The next day, we went for coffee, just as Nick had promised. He made me feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. The first thing he said to me wasn't even a hi or how are you. He looked at me in awe and said, "Wow, you're beautiful." I didn't think I could blush, but Nick made my cheeks turn red so often that it looked like I was wearing blush on purpose. We started meeting regularly after that, and soon we were dating. I felt so loved and appreciated. Whenever I was with Nick, everything seemed perfect. After dating for a year, we moved in together, and after 2 years, Nick proposed to me at the coffee shop where we had our first date. I was so happy that I said yes through tears. Our wedding was a small, intimate event with only our closest friends and family. For me, our relationship felt like a dream come true. Over those 2 years, Nick helped rebuild my confidence. He told me I was the prettiest girl in the world so many times that I started to believe it. He made me fall in love with myself again. That's why what happened later was so shocking and heartbreaking for me. During the first 2 years of our marriage, we focused on our careers. I worked at an accounting firm and earned a good salary. Nothing extraordinary, but enough to support myself. Nick, on the other hand, worked for a big company and earned 1.5 times what I did. He was always striving for more promotions, and I admired that about him. We both agreed to work hard because we wanted to start a family soon. We stuck to our plan, worked hard, and saved up a good amount of money. When we started trying for a baby, I got pregnant within 2 months. Nick and I were overjoyed. I felt like I was living my dream life. I had my dream job, lived in my dream house, was married to my dream man, and was about to have my dream baby. It felt like I had everything I ever wanted. Of course, I was nervous about becoming a parent for the first time. One night, after a tough day at work, Nick and I lay in bed and talked about our fears. "You know, babe, sometimes I get scared thinking about being a mom," I admitted. "It's just overwhelming to imagine being responsible for another life." "I feel the same way," Nick said. "The thought of accidentally hurting our child terrifies me. One small mistake could mess them up for life." Definitely, I agreed. But kids are resilient. They're not as delicate as we think, and being scared of messing up just shows that we'll be careful and make things right when we do make mistakes. You're right, Nick said. When I think back, my father was absent a lot. It left a void that nothing could fill. I don't want that for our child. You won't, I assured him. I'll be right there with you through everything. We'll learn and grow together, and I'll hold you accountable, just as I expect you to hold me. I promise to always be there with you, my love. How did I get so lucky with you? Nick asked. The feeling is mutual, babe, I replied. We're in this together no matter what. We'll be the best parents we can be. Even though I was terrified, knowing that Nick would be by my side comforted me greatly. I was certain that no matter what challenges came our way, he would be there for me. But I was so wrong. A couple of months after that conversation, I gave birth to a beautiful baby boy, and we named him Joe. The first few weeks with Joe were incredibly hard. He was a fussy baby who never slept at night. Nick and I took turns staying awake, and the lack of sleep started to wear us both down. We became cranky and irritable. To make matters worse, I was diagnosed with postpartum depression, PPD, so I struggled every day. I could barely get out of bed. Nick had to take care of most things: baby Joe, the household chores, and the cooking. I did what I could, but my mind felt like it was in a fog all the time. The only thing that seemed to help was lying in bed and crying. I tried to care for Joe when Nick was at work, but as soon as he got home, I would gladly hand Joe over to him. My PPD made it impossible for me to keep my job, so I had to resign and focus on coping with my illness. One day, after a tough day at work, Nick came home and lashed out at me. I couldn't get Joe to stop crying, and he said, "Why can't you do better as a mother? All you do is sit around." "What are you talking about?" I replied. "I'm fine with quitting my job, but I'm supposed to take care of Joe. If you can't even manage that, what's the point? You know I have postpartum depression," I cried. "How long will you use that as an excuse?" he snapped. "Do you think I'd lie about something this serious?" I asked. "Look at me. Do I seem like I'm enjoying any of this? Every day is a struggle, and it physically hurts not being able to care for Joe. I wish I could do more, but I can't." "I had a tough day at work too," Nick said, his tone softening. "My boss is pushing hard, and I'm on the edge, balancing it all, work and Joe. It's overwhelming." "I get it, babe," I said, trying to calm things down. "It's not easy. I'll try harder, do more, so you don't have to carry it all." No, I'll manage," Nick replied. "It's been 6 months since Joe's birth. I need to take my role seriously and support you. I don't want you to strain yourself. I'll handle things." "I want to do my part, babe," I said, "for Joe and for us. We're a team, right?" "Yeah, we are," Nick agreed. "We'll figure it out together." Even though I was terrified, knowing that Nick would be by my side comforted me greatly. I was certain that no matter what challenges came our way, he would be there for me, but I was so wrong. I started pushing myself to fight through the fog in my mind. I took care of everything around the house while looking after Joe. The only thing that comforted me was food, which is why I gained about 30 pounds. I didn't have the time or energy to work off all the food I was eating. I began to notice that Nick was spending less and less time at home. He still did his share of the responsibilities, but he was always working late. When he came home, he was too exhausted to talk to me or spend time with me. It hurt a lot because I was already struggling, and the one person who was supposed to be my support wasn't there for me. Every time I asked Nick why he was away so much, he said he was working towards a promotion for us. I just wanted one night with him, but he never seemed to want that. Even on weekends, he would lock himself in his office and work. Over time, I stopped asking and got used to his absence. One day, Nick surprised me by asking me to go with him to a work dinner. I was so excited that he was finally taking me out, so I went shopping and bought a nice dress. I got dressed up, dropped Joe off at my mom's place for the night, and expected a compliment from Nick, but Nick didn't say anything. I let it go, hoping the event would lift his spirits. At the dinner, I met a lot of Nick's colleagues, including his boss, Amelia. She wore a tight red gown that highlighted her figure and looked gorgeous. She approached us confidently with a pretty smile and greeted us with kisses on the cheek. "Hey, I'm Amelia." "Are you Nick's wife?" "Yes, I am. My name's Carrie." I thought so. I've heard so much about you. I hope most of it is good. Oh, definitely. You're quite the topic. Sorry for keeping Nick buried in work. I know he'd rather be with his pretty wife. Well, you better get him that promotion then. Oh, believe me, he's very close to getting one. That was good to hear, but the whole time, Nick just looked at the ground. He wouldn't talk to anyone when I was with him, but as soon as he left me to socialize on his own, he was open and laughing. It hurt. By the time the event ended, I was beyond upset, but I didn't bring it up because Nick didn't seem like he wanted to talk. When Joe turned a year old, he was a lot less fussy than when he was a newborn, so I had a little more free time. I decided to start looking for work, nothing too big, just something with flexible hours. After applying to a bunch of places, I finally got a job as a content writer. I was paid per article and could submit as many as I wanted, whenever I wanted. It was the perfect job. I excitedly told Nick about it that night at dinner, but he just grunted and gave me a half-hearted congrats. I didn't know why I expected him to be excited or happy for me. It hurt how little he cared, and I cried myself to sleep that night. After that, I kept myself busy with Joe, the chores, and my work. I began to feel better, and the fog started to lift, but there was still a huge hole in my heart that only Nick could fill. One morning, I missed him too much. After putting Joe to sleep, I walked into Nick's office. He wasn't home, but since he spent most of his time in that office, it had become his second room. I wanted to be close to him, so I sat in his office chair, closed my eyes, and took in his scent. When I opened my eyes, I looked at his desk and couldn't help my curiosity. I wanted to know what he did in his office all day. That's when I stumbled upon a manila file that looked out of place among the loose papers in the drawer. I picked it up and looked inside. To my absolute horror, I saw divorce papers. Nick had already signed them. The only space left blank was where I was supposed to sign. My heart shattered. I knew things weren't perfect between us, but I didn't think they were this bad. I still loved Nick, despite his absence. I thought he was just stressed about work and raising a child, but asking for a divorce was too much. I knew I had been difficult to deal with after giving birth to Joe, but I was really sick. There were many things I could have done differently, but at the same time, I felt like I couldn't have done anything. I sat in his office and cried for so long that when Nick came home, he looked surprised to see me sitting there. He saw the file on the table and realized that I had found out. "Nick, I need to know why," I said, my voice trembling. He looked down, avoiding my gaze, and quietly said, "Because I felt like the spark had faded." "Don't lie to me," I demanded. I thought if we were married, Nick would talk to me instead of just walking away. So I asked him, "Do you really want to tell me the truth?" He said, "Yes, for months I've been seeing someone, my boss, Amelia." I was shocked and asked, "How could you?" Nick explained that they spent many late nights at work together, and it just happened. Plus, she was very attractive. I asked, "Why would you do this to me?" Nick responded, "Look at yourself. I could overlook being poor, but you're not attractive anymore. You're so fat and ugly. Pregnancy ruined you. I regret getting you pregnant." I was heartbroken and asked, "How can you regret your own son?" Nick coldly replied, "I'd rather have a hot wife than a son. Sign the papers, I'm marrying Amelia." I was furious and told him he was heartless. I thought he loved us, loved me. But he said, "Things change, Carrie." In that moment, something came over me. I went to our room, packed his things, threw his bag at him, and told him to get out. I also said I would contest the divorce. Without a word, Nick left. I cried the whole night, wondering how he could do this to me and Joe. My sadness turned to anger. I wondered if Nick and Amelia had been having an affair when I went to that business dinner party. Is that what she meant when she said he would get a promotion? I wanted to break something, but instead took deep breaths, pulled out my laptop, and looked up Amelia. I found out she was married too. I didn't have proof, but I messaged her husband on Facebook, telling him what I found out. I hoped something would happen and that Nick and Amelia would face consequences. The next morning, I forced myself not to look at my phone and focused on taking care of Joe and working. I needed to earn money to afford a lawyer. In the afternoon, I had a visitor. Amelia's husband, Jerry. He looked like he hadn't slept. He awkwardly asked if he could come in, and I let him. We sat in the living room, and he asked how I was holding up. I said I was okay, just trying to wrap my head around everything. Jerry said, "Yeah, I know what you mean. This whole situation is a mess. So why did you come over?" He explained that after my text, he and Amelia had a massive fight. He came over partly to get out of his place and partly to suggest that we get revenge on them together. Revenge? I asked. Jerry explained. They both hurt us deeply. Maybe we can give them a taste of their own medicine. I agree, saying Nick not only betrayed me, but he also hurt our son. I'm with you on that. They need to understand the pain they caused. So we started planning. Jerry knew people in high positions at Amelia and Nick's company. He was the one who recommended Amelia for the job in the first place. Meanwhile, we tried to collect evidence of the affair. Jerry had access to all of Amelia's messages because her phone was synced with their iPad. He also helped me get a great lawyer. The next few weeks were hectic. We went to court for the divorce. Thanks to my lawyer, who presented a strong case of neglect, I had the judge's favor. During the trial, Jerry and I moved to the next phase of our plan. He contacted his friends at the company and informed them of Amelia's misconduct. Within a few days, both Nick and Amelia were fired. With proof of Nick's neglect and his unemployment, I won the case and got full custody of Joe. I also got more than half of our marital assets, making me financially stable. Nick and Amelia found out what Jerry and I had done, and they tried to contact us, leaving messages and emails, but we ignored them. Jerry and I started hanging out a lot after this ordeal, bonding over our heartbreak and betrayal. Eventually, we realized we have feelings for each other. Nick's constant neglect made me lose my love for him, and his actions sealed the deal. Jerry and I started dating a year after everything happened, and we still are to this day. He's great with Joe and has accepted him as his own son. A year and a half after Jerry and I started dating, Nick reached out to me. He had stopped trying to contact me 2 months after the court hearing since I never replied. He asked if we could meet at a cafe near my place. After discussing it with Jerry, I agreed. When I saw Nick, he looked haggard, like he hadn't been sleeping or eating. I have to admit, it felt satisfying to see him like that. He asked, "What's up?" "Make it quick. Jerry's waiting for me outside." "Jerry, why is he waiting for you?" he asked. "Oh, we're together," I replied. Nick got angry and said, "You got mad at me for sleeping with my boss, and here you are sleeping with her ex-husband." I calmly explained Jerry and I got together after what you, Amelia, did. Our relationship was completely over when Jerry and I started dating. It's very different from what you did. Is this why you called me? Nick looked embarrassed and said, "This is really embarrassing, but Amelia and I are pregnant and we're struggling a lot financially. It's putting a strain on our relationship. Do you think you could help me out a little?" I was shocked and replied, "Are you out of your mind? It's embarrassing that you're asking your ex-wife to lend you money to support your affair partner's baby. You're pathetic, Nick. Never contact me again." I couldn't believe his audacity. I walked out of that cafe with my head held high, feeling beyond satisfied. I had a loving boyfriend, an amazing son, and a good job that paid well, thanks to Jerry. I didn't know what happened to Nick and Amelia, and I didn't care. I was happy with my life and decided to put the past behind me. This whole experience prompted me to reinvent myself, and now I'm a completely different and better person. Thank you for listening to my story.
My heart sank as my mother-in-law brandished a knife, her words slicing through me like blades. "You not only demand our son to handle household chores and childcare, but now you're also after our finances. Get out of this house, you lazy freeloader. You barely bring in $700. A chill ran down my spine as I stood there, sweat beading on my forehead. Despite pouring all my energy into managing the household and looking after the children in lieu of my unemployed husband, I found myself confronted with accusations and hostility. It was a crushing moment, a culmination of frustration and despair. I knew then that I had reached my breaking point. I left the chores unfinished, scooped up my child, and made a beeline for my parents' house. I'm Emily, 23 years old, residing with my husband, our little one, and my mother-in-law. My mind wandered back to the beginning. Richard, my high school's golden boy, a star on the soccer field and beloved student president. His return to our small town after landing a job was met with adoration from everyone. When he approached me, I was taken aback. After a few dates, we dove into a serious relationship. Even now, as adults, he remained my handsome, envy-inducing boyfriend. After graduating from vocational school, I discovered I was pregnant. It wasn't the typical order of events, but I held onto the belief that I could still carve out a happy life with my child and Richard. Our home echoed with discussions about our future post-marriage. How about moving into my parents' place after we tie the knot? Richard suggested. Why? I envisioned just the three of us, our child included, I countered. But won't that be expensive? If we stay with my parents, money won't be a constant worry. With both of us working, we could afford our own place, couldn't we? Well, about that, my income this month is pretty dismal. How bad? I pressed. Less than $1,000. What? How is that possible? I thought you were working at an IT company. I quit. Now I'm trying my luck at the casino and picking up part-time gigs. The casino? Why would you do that? My disbelief hung heavy in the air. It turned out he had quit his job after only a month. If you're okay handling all the expenses, I'm fine with getting an apartment, he stated matter-of-factly. His detached demeanor left me feeling uneasy, questioning if I was the only one truly invested in our fresh start together. Sensing my apprehension, he grasped both of my hands firmly. It's just temporary until I secure another job. I'll make you happy, Emily. I'll take care of all the household chores and child rearing until then. Trusting in his assurances, we exchanged vows. Our journey together began in his parents' home. Following a safe delivery, I pledged to give my all for my son. Both Richard and my mother-in-law appeared content, and I eagerly anticipated our shared journey ahead. However, even after our son was born, Richard neglected his responsibilities, opting to spend his days at the casino. After the casino again, what about helping with the household chores and caring for our child? I confronted him about his broken promise. Don't you dare tell me what to do. Richard's sudden outburst caught me off guard. Perplexed by the sudden tension, my mother-in-law intervened, drawn by the commotion. What's all this noise? It's just that I'm overwhelmed with work, and she's asking for assistance with chores and childcare, I explained. What? That's a wife's duty. My mother-in-law's response left me stunned. Richard hadn't informed his mother about quitting his job. Instead, he painted me as an unreasonable wife, burdening him with household chores and childcare. Initially, my mother-in-law, who had been kind, grew to resent me after buying into Richard's narrative. Despite his sporadic part-time work and frequent trips to the casino, where he barely earned $700, Richard persisted in his fruitless attempts to double his earnings, often losing everything. I shouldered the majority of our living expenses, which made our lives increasingly challenging. Unable to bear the financial strain any longer, I reluctantly re-entered the workforce. After dropping off our son at the child care center, I was fortunate to secure a job as a dental hygienist rather swiftly. However, upon returning home each evening, I was greeted by my mother-in-law's tirades. What time do you call this? This isn't playtime. You're a parent, yet all you do is gallivant around. Get dinner started now. In her frustration, she slammed the newspaper she was holding onto the floor, a common occurrence whenever she was upset. My mother-in-law had a volatile temperament, her mood shifting at the slightest provocation. The unpredictability of her reactions left me feeling powerless. Juggling the responsibilities of caring for my young son, working and managing household chores left me mentally and physically drained. Unable to endure it any longer, I resolved to confront Richard once again. I intercepted him early in the morning before he headed out to the casino. Listen, I've reached my breaking point. Can't you lend a hand with our child, even just a little? What? Like I said, I'm swamped. I'm gearing up to find a new job. You get that, right? Or would you prefer I stayed unemployed forever? Imagine the father of your child, Douglas. If you're not happy, just follow orders. But we're barely getting by as it is. I'm covering all our food expenses with my savings, you know. Have you any idea how costly diapers are? You claim to be earning at the casino, yet you never contribute any money. Most of our living expenses were covered by my earnings. Initially, my mother-in-law handled the utility bills, but recently she began requesting $500 per month, forcing me to dip into my savings. Even our grocery bills were eating away at my dwindling funds, leaving me with little left. All I had to rely on was money I had saved from a part-time job during my student days. Enough. How dare you talk back to me? After all, you're the one who moved into my house. Richard, typically gentle, underwent a stark transformation when money or casino matters were involved. His outburst drew my mother-in-law into the room. "What's all this now? Is your wife causing trouble again?" she interjected. "Yeah, she is. She's insisting I do housework, look after the child, and foot the living expenses. And on top of that, What audacity you have, Richard. You ought to be heading to work." "Thanks, I'll handle it from here," Richard declared loudly as he stepped outside. Mother-in-law's eyes narrowed. "You've got some nerve, burdening us with childcare and household chores while demanding money. It's disgraceful." "It's not like that. I'm not making demands. It's just that without a little assistance, life is incredibly challenging. Perhaps you're not managing it well. Are you being careless with money?" Mother-in-law seemed oblivious to the reality. She had no idea that her own son was unemployed and spending all his time at the casino. I had been instructed to stay silent, but I was at my wits' end. "Do you know that Richard isn't bringing in a single cent? He's unemployed because he quit his job." "What are you implying?" "Richard has always been outstanding. Yes, he may have stumbled with his college entrance exams, but he landed a job at a reputable company afterward. He quit that job after just a month. Now, he's always at the casino. I can't sustain us on my savings alone." "That's absurd. Stop spouting nonsense." Mother-in-law vehemently rejected my claims. Her son, who had always been a star in sports and academics, was her pride and joy. The idea that he was now unemployed and squandering his time at the casino was too much for her to accept. Her face flushed with anger, mother-in-law stormed out of the room. When she returned with deliberate steps, I was taken aback to find her wielding a knife. "What are you intending to do?" "Please put it down," I pleaded, edging away while cradling my son. Mother-in-law closed in slowly, the blade held menacingly aloft. With a chilling precision, she brought the tip of the knife to my throat. "Enough of your insults toward my son. Having a wife like you is dragging Richard down. You're a lazy leech, surviving on a measly 70,000. Leave this house." Her harsh words sent shivers down my spine. Any sudden move could endanger my son. Seeing my silence and the fear etched on my face, mother-in-law seemed satisfied and lowered the knife. "But you understand, there's no place for parasites like you. Just keep quiet and tend to your chores," she spat before retreating to her room. Relieved of the immediate threat, I crumpled to the floor, my son's sobs echoing in the tense air. I comforted him with gentle strokes on his back, but inside, a resolve solidified. We couldn't remain in this house any longer. The casual threat of a knife was unfathomable. She seemed devoid of humanity. I had been swayed by Richard's honeyed words until now. After each argument, I felt compelled to stand by him, believing he'd crumble without me. But I had reached my breaking point. Above all, my maternal instinct screamed to shield my sobbing son in my arms. This environment was no place to raise him. The decision was made. We would leave the next day. In the morning, my mother-in-law's stern voice pierced the air. "Emily, please prepare for my husband's memorial service next week. All our relatives will be attending, so ensure everything is flawless," she commanded before hurrying off to a neighbor's house, leaving no room for my response. The following week marked my father-in-law's memorial service. Richard and my mother-in-law were discussing arrangements for a lavish feast and reminiscing about him. I was tasked with all the preparations, but I found myself mentally checked out. As soon as Richard and my mother-in-law stepped out, I hastily gathered my belongings and fled from their house. I didn't have much, just my clothes, my son's toys, and diapers. When I arrived at my parents' house, they were taken aback. However, as I poured out my heart to them, my mother was moved to tears and enveloped me in a tight embrace. My typically composed father was visibly enraged and instructed me to rest. Later that evening, the phone rang. It was undoubtedly Richard, wondering why I hadn't returned to prepare dinner. I disregard the call and opt to block his number. The following day, mother-in-law and Richard arrived together at my parents' house, banging on the door in the early hours. Though my parents attempted to deter them, I insist they be allowed inside. As I swing the door open, they launch into a tirade immediately. "How could you vanish without a word? What kind of wife does that? Isn't it odd to disappear without a trace? Could you please lower your voices? You're disturbing the neighbors." I respond calmly, fighting the impulse to retort, "Who's the actual issue here?" Upon witnessing my firm stance, they attempt to seize me, but my father intervenes. "If you resort to violence, we'll call the authorities. Let's discuss this calmly inside first." With my parents by my side, I initiate the conversation with mother-in-law and Richard. "Why did you vanish without a word?" I was at my breaking point juggling childcare and my job, feeling utterly overwhelmed, yet you never offered a helping hand despite my pleas. Well, I was occupied as well. Occupied at the casino, as I've mentioned before. Our son doesn't frequent the casino. Stop spreading falsehoods, mother-in-law persisted, seemingly under the impression that Richard was still employed. It's understandable, considering what a dutiful son he's always been. She likely held onto that belief. Sometimes ignorance is a blessing. So, mother-in-law, where do you think Richard is currently employed? At a securities company. I've seen the job offer letter, remember? Well then, perhaps we should give them a call to confirm if Richard is still on their staff. That would settle the matter. Hold on a moment, Richard interjected, clearly flustered. What's the issue if I'm still employed there? It shouldn't be a problem. Well, that's I hesitated, noticing Richard's visible discomfort, then dialed the securities company's number on my phone. Switching the call to speaker mode, I ensured everyone could hear as I inquired about Richard's employment status. That individual resigned several years ago, if memory serves me correctly. He was with us for just about a month. The voice from the phone left mother-in-law speechless. Richard, now looking down, clenched his fists. Did you really quit? Why? I pressed. Because it was frustrating. Everything was just grunt work and the boss would yell at me for the smallest mistakes. It was harassment, Richard finally admitted. Why haven't you kept us informed about your activities since then? I've been actively searching for a job. For how long have you been on the hunt? It doesn't appear to be yielding any results. Can you provide a count of how many companies you've applied to so I can verify? Well, the job market isn't exactly overflowing with great opportunities. I'm waiting for the right fit to come along. You seem quite confident in your abilities. By the way, you're currently working part-time, correct? What was your income last month? 700. 700. Didn't you claim to mother-in-law that Emily could barely make 700 and couldn't fend for herself, so you were the sole provider? Apparently, he missiled mother-in-law, suggesting I wasn't bringing in anything, but the reality was quite different. As a dental hygienist, my salary isn't extravagant, but I was making at least $2,000. Upon learning the truth, mother-in-law flushed crimson with anger, shooting daggers at Richard. Faced with the reality, Richard erupted in fury. Why must you do this? This is all you're doing, making me appear foolish. His pride evidently wounded, he couldn't bear the humiliation, slamming his fists on the table in frustration. You shouldn't divulge such matters in public. It's defamation, I uttered in disbelief. If you wish to pursue legal action, feel free, but I'll counter with a lawsuit for your knife threat as well. And let's not forget, lawsuits come with a hefty price tag. Do you have the funds? Richard retorted, clicking his tongue in frustration. It was likely he had squandered all his earnings at the casino. Meanwhile, mother-in-law remained in shock upon discovering the truth about Richard's unemployment. I've laid it all out for her. I'm the sole earner covering all our living expenses. When Richard and I wed, he promised to manage household duties and childcare in lieu of my job. But once married, he failed to fulfill any of those obligations. That contradicts what I've been told. Mother-in-law seemed to blindly trust whatever Richard fed her, right? She became agitated when I requested assistance with chores and childcare. She even resorted to brandishing a knife, commanding me to keep quiet and attend to my housework. I could see my mother-in-law's complexion draining. Standing before my parents, being confronted for her misconduct, she appeared uneasy. Mother-in-law, you haven't contributed a dime to the household either. We've relied solely on my income all this time. I have no intention of continuing to toil for you, so I'm requesting a divorce. Divorce? Hold on a moment. Don't just drop such bombshells out of nowhere. Yes, indeed. I'll pitch in as well, so please reconsider and return, they implored. No, thank you, I firmly reiterated, their surprise evident in widened eyes. It was likely a shock for them, accustomed to my usual compliance even amidst shouting or persistent pleas, to hear my unequivocal refusal this time. I refuse to live with someone who resorts to wielding a knife to assert dominance. I'm exhausted from sharing a roof with Richard, who spends his days gambling at the casino. I intend to seek compensation for all the labor I've contributed thus far, as well as child support. That's going to be quite a challenge. I simply can't afford such payments, mother-in-law protested. Well then, cease gambling immediately and start making payments, I countered. But I can't possibly do that. I'm unemployed. Richard's admission left me flabbergasted by his sheer lack of foresight. You're unemployed because you're too selective about the jobs you're willing to take. Do you have any idea what it means to be willing to do whatever it takes? There aren't many companies out there willing to hire someone with no significant qualifications or work experience. Don't take society for granted. Many people are out there working tirelessly in challenging conditions to make ends meet. Yet individuals who quit their jobs on a whim because they're upset or don't enjoy their work, nobody's going to be eager to hire them, he lectures, expressing doubt about Richard's ability to find employment given his current approach. I'll have my lawyer handle the divorce proceedings. Please refrain from contacting me in any way from now on. What about us? How can you be so selfish? What will become of us? Mother-in-law's anger flared at my statement. I'm not sure. Perhaps you should find a way to support yourself, I retorted, deliberately adopting a puzzled expression in response to her heated words. Heartless. I won't tolerate being called that by you. Remember when you referred to me, your daughter-in-law, as a leech surviving on a meager $700 a month? It was you who held a knife to my throat and demanded my silence. And by the way, the lazy individual earning $700 a month is sitting right beside you. Aren't you going to ask him to leave? As I spoke, mother-in-law trembled with rage. Perhaps I had pushed too far. Suddenly, she lunged forward, grabbing my collar. Stop it. I warned you. I'll call the police if you lay a hand on her. My father intervened forcefully, trying to pull her away, but she was too agitated to be restrained. So, not content with threats of a knife, now resorting to physical violence. Barbaric, wouldn't you agree it's best not to compound your offenses? I challenged mother-in-law, met with a resentful glare. Disregarding her, I turned my attention to Richard. I held him to hope that you would change, but I'm relinquishing that now. My priority is to protect our son. I won't burden you any longer. I'll handle the finances, the household chores, and childcare. Please come back. You'll handle the money? Really? Even with careful budgeting, it exceeds $1,000 a month. Can you manage that? Richard's complexion paled at my words. He had never earned more than $1,000 since quitting his job. But I have Mom's pension. So you're admitting you're relying on my pension now? Even my usually composed mother-in-law couldn't contain her frustration at Richard's absurd declaration. I don't have any other options. I'm unemployed. I've been doing some part-time work now. Richard replied defensively. Can't we attempt to resolve things? Mother-in-law interjected, hoping for reconciliation. Finally breaking his silence, my father addressed Richard sternly. Richard, you and your mother have taken undue advantage of our daughter. Had I known your true character, I would have vehemently opposed this marriage. I refuse to allow her back into your home. I'm cutting all ties with you. But I can't imagine life without Emily. Please grant me another chance, Richard pleaded desperately. Don't be ridiculous. Life without our daughter? Yet you're already relying on her. A man unwilling to strive for his own livelihood and to ensure his wife's well-being doesn't deserve our daughter. Leave at once. My father's voice carried an unusual edge, sending shivers down my spine. Richard knelt, head bowed, a pitiful sight devoid of the charm I once saw in him during our college days. Please reconsider, Emily. I'm begging you, Richard implored, his voice tinged with desperation. But my parents remained resolute. They had reached their limit. I refuse to be treated like a servant by the two of you any longer. Please refrain from involving me in anything moving forward, I asserted as we ushered them out of the house, swiftly locking the door behind them. For a while, they pounded on the door, shouted, but when a passing police officer intervened, they hastily fled. Afterward, I learned that Richard had been disowned by his mother and ejected from their home. He now resides in a dilapidated apartment, scraping by on welfare and sporadic part-time jobs. His volatile temper renders him unable to hold down any job for long, leading to a revolving door of positions at convenience stores, construction sites, and the like. Financial strain weighs heavily on him. In his efforts to meet his obligations for compensation and child support, Richard juggles multiple part-time jobs, leaving little room to pursue full-time employment. Rumors circulate that he still frequents the casino and may even be in debt. However, I pay little mind to such hearsay. News of Richard's downfall spreads rapidly among our former high school peers, prompting numerous sightings and updates. Reports of his eviction by his mother and their frequent altercations become common knowledge. His unemployment and abandonment by his wife become public gossip. Undoubtedly, his mother feels a deep sense of embarrassment after years of boasting about her son's achievements. She seldom ventures outside now. With the unwavering support of my parents in managing household duties and caring for my son, I continue to work. I now enjoy more quality time with my son, no longer needing to rely on daycare services. My parents' assistance has provided me with newfound freedom and stability. Taking care of him has made everything so much better. I only wish I had initiated the divorce sooner. Moving forward, I'm determined to cherish every moment I spend with my son in which